alone in the wilderness. For so many people, this is the scariest situation imaginable. No food, no shelter, no Wi-Fi. Just a human being facing off with the raw power of nature. And even though most of us wouldn't survive 3 days without running water, people are fascinated by survivalists. In the movies, a survival story means instant drama, low budgets, and a chance for lead actors to really show off their talents. Out in the middle of nowhere, you don't need an expensive set or even a second character to make things interesting, although it does come with special screenwriting challenges. So, whether you're crossing a desert, freezing in the tundra, or lost at sea, the survival story is a genre with enormous potential. People have always been afraid of getting lost. No matter how many cities we build, most of the Earth's surface will always be covered in oceans and deserts. Millions of square miles unfit for human habitation. European folk tales are full of travelers, often children, getting lost in the woods. Nature was something to be feared and tamed, something you crossed in search of better fortunes. As the age of exploration began, Europeans had to face a serious fear: getting marooned in distant lands, where they might spend the rest of their natural lives. This was the fate of Robinson Crusoe, the famous fictional castaway from Daniel Defoe's 17th century novel. It's also what happens to Antonio, one of the lead characters in Shakespeare's The Tempest. For the first time in Western history, sailors might wash up on distant shores where there was little hope of ever being found or rescued. And for the next few centuries, the European imagination went wild. This genre broke new ground in the Americas, when pioneers ventured into unforgiving climates. Audiences thrilled at the true story of the Donner Party, an expedition that got lost in the Sierra Nevadas and required the starving settlers to cannibalize their own members. This uncomfortable theme has continued to the present day. Not just people eating each other, but the very basic question: if things got bad enough, what would you do to stay alive? But the 19th century also birthed a new concept. What about people who want to live in the wilderness? So began a long lineage of noble woodsmen who lived off the land and carefully avoided civilization. Characters like Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone excited the imagination. These weren't just unlucky profiteers who happened to lose their way. They loved nature, even the parts of nature that might kill them. Again and again, and in American legends, we watch people transform in the wilderness as they appreciate the simple necessities and pleasures that sustain them. The logical extreme is none other than Tarzan, King of the Apes. The novel, by Edgar Rice Burroughs, was an instant success and has inspired dozens of film adaptations. Here, a story of survival is flipped on its head when the son of an English noble is fully raised in the jungle. Burroughs dared to question the virtues of civilized life, celebrating a hero who is strong, intelligent, and caring, while also being basically naked in the woods. This theme has continued to the present day with films like Never Cry Wolf, the true story of a biologist isolating himself in Alaska. As the film progresses, our protagonist behaves more and more like the wild animals he observes. The film never judges his transformation, but we see how easily he slips into a state of nature. He stops fearing the packs of wolves that prowl around him, and by the end, he even seems to consider himself a member of their pack. Or there's Jeremiah Johnson, the 1972 film about a mountain man living in the Rocky Mountains. Johnson interacts with people, but he spends most of the film secluded in a cabin he built himself. Jeremiah Johnson isn't well remembered these days, except as a popular meme. Most survival stories aren't nearly so uplifting, because most survivalists don't choose to get lost. The purest scenario drops a lead character into the middle of a wild place, without warning or preparation. This is the true test. How do you survive when you didn't even expect to be here? This is a tricky narrative device because you have to pick a place on Earth that is still undeveloped. The age-old trope involves a shipwreck and a remote island, like Robinson Crusoe. This gives your characters an entire landscape to explore, and use to their advantage. A masterpiece of the survival genre is Castaway. A plane crashes on a tropical island, and a regular guy named Chuck Noland lives there alone for 4 years. We see all the primal strategies for staying alive, starting fires, building shelters, and eventually putting together a seaworthy raft. Castaway also zooms in on one character, who dominates the screen for 144 minutes. The screenwriter, cast, and crew have to work hard to keep this one-man show engaging. The clever solution? Turn a beach ball into a second character, named Wilson, so Chuck has someone to interact with, to share his thoughts and emotions. Another tactic is to put characters on the mainland, but dangerously far from other people. This is what befalls two rivals in The Edge, when their prop plane goes down in Alaska, or there's The Way Back, the true story of several prisoners of war in World War II escaping a prison camp and walking 4,000 miles across Central Asia. In these cases, the survival story is also a quest. The characters can't stay where they are, and they must go on a long journey to reach their goal: other people. Perhaps the most nightmarish scenario is the survivalist who is trapped somewhere. Not only do we find ourselves isolated, but we also can't leave a confined space. This is the premise behind 127 Hours. A rock climber knows where he is, and the people are close by, but he can't get to them, because his arm is pinned beneath a fallen boulder. Based on a real event, the narrative follows familiar tropes: limited sustenance, constant problem solving, and a revelation about the fragility of life. A similar conundrum is the survivalist lost at sea. Here, protagonists are moving and somehow floating, but they are also exposed to the elements and lack of fresh supplies. This environment is particularly existential. There are no hills or trees to distract us, nowhere for the main character to hide. It's just a naked face-off between man and nature. The protagonist could be alone, as in the sailing film All Is Lost, or the protagonist could be huddled in a group, as in Alfred Hitchcock's paranoid thriller Lifeboat. Or your lead could get stuck on a raft with a Bengal tiger, like the adventure parable Life of Pi. In each case, the characters are trapped, while also surrounded by endless, open space. The most cynical portrayal of all is a survival tale that involves multiple people who don't get along. Nature is still a problem, of course, but the protagonists must also struggle with each other. This is the basis for any number of reality TV shows, where producers have deliberately cast conflicting personalities and put them in a rugged setting. This is a favorite theme for storytellers to explore. What happens to people when you take away all rules and social safeguards? Does life become, as the philosopher Thomas Hobbes put it, nasty, brutish, and short? The author William Golding certainly thought so. Generations of high school students have read Lord of the Flies, and the book has twice been adapted to film. Here we see a group of tween boys stranded on an island together, and instead of helping each other out and building a new society, they revert into a bloodthirsty tribe. This is a far cry from Davy Crockett, benevolent king of the wild frontier. To Golding, human beings are inherently destructive, and we bring our cruel and competitive natures everywhere we go, even to the middle of nowhere. There's one final consideration if you're telling a survival story. How does anyone know what happened? Usually somebody lives to tell the tale, which is one reason so many survival epics are based on true accounts. Now and again, the film ends in tragedy. A single survivor must recount the traumatizing events that led to the present. Or we're left with some kind of document. Into the Wild, a true story about a young man who died in the Alaskan wilderness, relied heavily on Chris McCandless's journal. The film Open Water ends on a chilling note, when a waterproof camera is pulled out of a dead shark, and the roll of film, presumably, documents its owner's final days. However the story is told, survival films tend to make a bold statement about people, about nature, and our complex, sometimes deadly, relationship. It's a great setting for independent and low-budget filmmakers, but you do have to innovate ways to keep the story moving, especially if the protagonist is alone. If you can make it work and really engage an audience from beginning to end, there's just one thing to say.